A big jobs report today declaring that things are just humming along. CNBC headline, job growth zoomed in March. Downright zoomed as payrolls jumped by 303,000 and unemployment dropped to 3.8%. They said the unemployment rate edged lower to 3.8% as expected, even though the labor force participation rate moved higher to 62.7%. And as far as those payrolls are concerned, they say the 303,000 increase to non-farm payrolls beat the Dow Jones estimate for a rise of $200,000. Now, on the surface, that sounds great, but what's underneath it? Well, let's ask EJ Antoni. He's the in-house economist for the Vince Coglianese Show and an economist at the Heritage Foundation as well. Sir, great to talk to you today. Thank you.
Vince, always great to be with you.
You are on a tear this morning. I saw all of your posts on X talking about what's actually inside of this data. Take us through it. What do you see here?
Well, essentially, Vince, it comes down to, I think, where are the jobs that are being created? What kinds of jobs are being created? Who has these jobs? What's the actual quality of these jobs? And unfortunately, once you start answering those questions, you find out that things are nowhere near as good as the headlines are making them out to be. So if we just take, just as an example, what kinds of jobs are we adding? We're not adding full-time jobs. We're losing them. And that's not just the month of March. This is something we've been talking about for a while.
Yes.
Over the last year, we have lost full-time jobs. The only jobs we're adding anymore in this economy are part-time ones. And a key reason for that is that people increasingly can't make ends meet. And so to try to fill the gaps to make it from paycheck to paycheck, so they're not just using credit cards every month, they're having to get part-time jobs in addition to the full-time work they already have.
Now,
so that's increasing your jobs numbers, but it's not a sign of wealth and prosperity.
I can say, anecdotally, I've talked to people who are in the job market right now, friends who are looking for gigs, and what they've detected is that, especially among the private sector, it's like impossible. It's impossible. It's like looking for jobs and getting interviews, a lot of competition for that. But government jobs, those tend to be available. Those are the ones where you're getting callbacks and you can go work for the government. What's the difference here between the private sector and the government when it comes to this full-time work?
Well, at first glance, it looks like it's roughly a 3-to-1 ratio. In other words, for every 3 private sector jobs you add, you're adding about 1 government job. But again, you have to ask about the quality of these jobs. And you see that disproportionately the government jobs are more likely to be full-time and the private sector jobs more likely to be part-time. But on top of that, I think we're really missing, if that's all we talk about, we're missing the fact that several sectors of the economy are completely dominated by government. In other words, it is government dollars, aka taxpayer dollars, that fund most of these industries and fund most of the payrolls. Healthcare is a great example of that. So a lot of the jobs that are being added in the healthcare sector today fall under the heading of private jobs, but they're paid for by public dollars.
Remind me, how many private sector jobs does it take to pay for a government job right now?
It depends, but typically you need about 20-to-1. The reason I say it depends is because if you're in a time like we are today, where so many of the private sector jobs you're adding are part-time, you need a whole heck of a lot more of those in order to support a single full-time government job than if all the private sector jobs were full-time.
That's a huge number, though, 20-to-1. So you need 20 private sector jobs just to fund 1 government job. And yet, when you look at this data, as I understand it, it's a part-time job increase. A lot of people working multiple jobs. The numbers here, by the way, they include people being double counted, correct? So if you're being double counted, it pads the numbers as we see each month, right?
Right. That's become a really big problem now with these monthly numbers, is that, again, every time I go out and I get another part-time gig, I increase the number of monthly payrolls, but I'm not actually increasing the number of people employed. Now, I will say in this last month, we did see an increase in the number of people employed. We did see more people returning to the labor market. So that's a very welcome change from the path we were on previously. But we still have a very long way to go. You look at where we are today versus pre-pandemic, and a couple percentage points in something like labor force participation rate equates to millions of people missing from the labor market.
I have to say, I don't know why, but you seem to be the only person or one of the few economists who says all of this out loud. I look at some of the economic media, a lot of it, and although some of this data gets referenced, it's usually like 40 paragraphs down, and they don't emphasize it. For instance, like the fact that we keep losing full-time workers every month and we're only adding part-time jobs, shouldn't that be a higher priority for the economic press?
You would think so. So, who knows, Vince? Maybe it has to do with their motivations. I'm not in their head, so I can't answer that question. But I will say at the end of the day, no matter what your motivations are, you have a duty to the numbers. If you're going to be a data scientist, then you need to be a data scientist, not a political scientist.
Right. Yeah, for sure. And then there's the reality that we keep seeing month after month, that native-born Americans have been either stagnant or losing jobs, and foreign-born workers are picking up all of the job gains. What does this last month's data show us?
This last month shows basically a continuation of that trend. If you look at what has happened over the last year, and the reason you want to, with these data sets, look at a year-over-year basis and not a month-to-month basis is that they're not seasonally adjusted by the BLS. In other words, there are typical patterns that happen year after year, so you'll have predictable increases or decreases in one month or another. So a month-to-month comparison is not apples to apples, it's apples to oranges. So
Sure.
If you continue to look at this in terms of year over year, you still see the pattern of foreign-born workers getting all of the jobs and native-born Americans actually losing jobs. And so not only are foreign-born workers above their pre-pandemic employment level, they're even above the pre-pandemic trend. So meanwhile, again, native-born Americans have fallen below. I mean, we're way below trend by several million, but we're even below the pre-pandemic level.
How much of that is based on? I've seen some debate on this subject. How much of that is based on native-born American workers retiring, leaving the job force at an older age, and foreign-born workers just being younger workers in the United States? And how much of that is, like companies price shopping? They're going to foreign-born workers because they're getting a better deal than native-born.
Well, a lot of this has to do with exactly that last point you just made. We saw that with Tyson Foods, for example. I think that was only a few weeks ago that they made that major announcement that they were literally laying off all these American workers so that they could hire foreigners. And at the end of the day, that is the primary driver, because you can look at people who are retiring, but it doesn't account for a significant enough number of people to have an impact in terms of these macro level numbers. We don't have enough people retiring, native-born Americans, that is. We don't have enough of them retiring to cause these employment levels to be going down. Maybe slow the rate of increase, but certainly not enough to make these numbers negative. But that's exactly what we're seeing. Some of that has to do with the fact that so many of these native-born Americans have left the workforce and are now classified as disabled. But that's a different conversation.
Let me play some audio for you. This is Lael Brainerd, an economic advisor on CNBC today, talking about what's going on with gas prices right now. I want you to hear this and react to it. Here we go.
Yeah, so gas prices at the pump are so important for American families, and a big focus of President Biden. We are pleased that gas prices have come down by $1.40 relative to that peak that was caused by Russia's invasion of Ukraine. But as you say, we are watching carefully to make sure that those gas prices at the pump don't go up.
But as I understand it, what she's doing, what the Biden administration is doing, EJ Antoni, is she's measuring their success against Biden's worst moment and saying, oh, we're back from Biden's worst moment. But aren't gas prices up something like 50% from when Joe Biden took office?
Right, exactly. It's an incredible sleight of hand, Vince, and you really just nailed it there. It's not that we're going to compare prices today to when we took office. Oh, no, we're going to compare it to when we made the most mistakes possible to show you that, well, we've come back from the brink and it's still pretty bad, but hey, at least we're not back at the brink. So at the end of the day, gas prices were still way up on the day before Putin invaded Ukraine. And last time I checked, Putin is still in Ukraine. So that conflict has not been resolved. That clearly did not have as much of an impact on the oil market as they're pretending it has. A big impact has been the fact that the Biden administration drained about half of the strategic petroleum reserve during a midterm election year. And now, just a few days ago, they casually announced, oh, you know what, prices are up, so we're actually not going to refill it. And coincidentally, it's another election year. Of course, that really doesn't pass the smell test, the fact that prices are up so they're not going to refill it, because when prices first fell below the level at which they promised they would refill the reserve, they reneged on the promise then too and made up an excuse about how, oh, it's just not a good time right now to try to refill it. So clearly they don't pay attention to prices. They pay attention to other things, probably polls.
Right. It's a political consideration, which is all the more reason why it's ridiculous that Karine Jean-Pierre said earlier this week, oh, that's a Department of Energy issue. It's not really a White House thing. No, this is clearly being directed by the people who are trying to navigate the politics of an election year, and that emanates right from the White House.
Right. Probably about the only thing that Ms. Brainerd said that was actually honest was when she said that gas prices matter a lot. Yes, they do. That's something that Americans pay a lot of attention to, which is a key reason why your boss's approval ratings are so bad.
Yeah. Something else Lael Brainerd said, and again, she's the director of the National Economic Council in the Biden administration. Here she is talking about foreign-born workers. This is part of the conversation we were just having, EJ, on how so many of these jobs are going to foreigners and not to native-born Americans. Here's what she answered about work permits.
Will you please disclose how many work permits you've issued? We don't know. The economists don't know. We also don't know what's the real numbers, because the Census Bureau has not accounted for immigrants properly. Can you give us a sense on work permits right here, right now?
Yeah, so I can't give you any specific numbers. I'm looking at the jobs market from this morning. You're looking at the same numbers. What we see is that the employment to population ratio is very strong.
How could she not give numbers like that? That's literally the federal government's responsibility about who gets work permits in the United States.
Well, because that information is damning to her cause. So the last thing she's going to do is disseminate it. But the last point she made there, where she starts bringing up these other statistics, whether it's the employment to population ratio or the labor force participation rate, you can use almost any kind of metric you want, Vince, and you can look at the pre-pandemic trend that we were on, and you can see where we should be today in terms of all these different metrics if the economy had actually recovered. And no matter which methodology you choose, there's about 4 or 5. In any event, you find we are missing millions, literally millions of people from the workforce. And if you put those people back in to the unemployment calculation, because right now they're excluded from the unemployment rate calculation, so put those people back in, what do the numbers say? You're not looking at 3.8%. You're looking at somewhere between 6.5 and 7.7% unemployment. There are very good reasons, Vince, why people feel so down about this economy.
Yeah. Okay. So this is the big question I wanted to ask too on this issue. I keep citing that the media keeps saying over and over that it's absurd that people feel so bad about the economy when the economy is doing so great. They constantly say that their viewers and listeners and readers are just too ill-informed to understand how great things really are. But when you are looking at the data, what are the things you look for to say that explains it? This is why the sentiment is so off. I mean, like one of the things I keep talking about with you is credit card debt. Credit card debt is sky high. We've never been at the level of credit card debt we are now. And people are having trouble just making those credit card payments. What are you looking for when you try to assess why is sentiment so poor on the economy?
Oh, Vince, it's a great question. And a lot of it is just drilling down in this data to go beyond the headlines and see, okay, not just how many jobs are added, but what kinds of jobs are being added. We already talked about the difference between full-time and part-time, but what about things like those good-paying blue-collar manufacturing jobs? Those have been stagnant. They really haven't budged since the beginning of not this year, but last year. So that's an industry where it essentially has turned anemic. It's completely stagnant. There's no growth. But that's an area where we have traditionally depended on some very robust growth to help build the middle class. And again, once you start drilling down and you look at some of these individual sectors, you start seeing more and more red flags. Credit card debt that you already brought up is a great example of that. And I like to look at not only the overall amount of outstanding debt, but the average interest rate on that debt. And you combine that information and you realize that American families today are paying over $240 billion with a B a year just in interest on their credit cards. That's not even paying a dime towards paying down the balance. That is literally just going to interest.
One last data point I'm interested in, because I just thought of it. What's the direction of welfare right now? Are the welfare rolls growing under Joe Biden?
You know, unfortunately, they are. And doubly unfortunate is the fact that this administration, not only do they not see it as a problem, but like the Obama administration, they see it as a mark of success. They think that because we are swelling the welfare rolls by increasing eligibility and increasing benefits, that somehow that is a sign of a compassionate society. There's nothing compassionate about trapping people on welfare for not just the rest of their lives, but also intergenerationally. One of the great achievements of the Trump administration, and whether you love him or hate him, you have to acknowledge that this was an achievement, was reducing welfare rolls and getting people back to work.
Yeah, that's a huge achievement, and that's what every American wants. Except for the ghouls in Washington, apparently. EJ Antoni, thank you as always for an excellent assessment of the state of our economy. Really appreciate your time. Thank you, sir.